My father left 3 million pounds to my brothers. I got nothing. The reason was written right there in his will. Because I'm a woman. Before I proceed, like and subscribe to the channel to get more interesting Reddit stories that will keep you at the edge of your seats. I know what you're thinking. This sounds like something from decades ago. But this happened last week, in 2025. The solicitor read it out loud in front of all of us. My father genuinely believed that my future husband, a man I haven't even met, would take care of me, so I didn't need anything from him. If you've ever been treated differently by your own family because of your gender, or if you think daughters and sons should be valued the same way, I need you to hear this whole thing, because what happened after that reading was worse than the will itself. My name's Charlotte. I'm 27. I work in marketing for a mid-sized firm in Manchester. I've been financially independent since I graduated 5 years ago. I pay my own rent, I have my own car. I've never asked my father for money, not once since I left university. I'm single. I'm not seeing anyone. I'm not even close to getting married. I've had relationships, sure, but nothing serious in the last 2 years. I've been focused on my career, on building something for myself. I thought that's what you were supposed to do. My relationship with my father was complicated. I wouldn't call it close, but it wasn't hostile either. He wasn't the kind of man who talked about feelings. He showed love through practicality, fixed things, gave advice when asked, paid for my education without complaint. I always assumed that meant he was proud of me, even if he never said it directly. I have 2 younger brothers. Tom is 23. He works in sales, still lives at home. Well, he did until recently. James is 21. He's in his final year at university studying business. We're not estranged or anything. We've always gotten along. Family dinners were fine. We texted in the group chat. Normal sibling stuff. I thought I knew where I stood in this family. I really did. Dad died 4 months ago. Heart attack. Sudden. He was 61. It happened at home. Mom found him in the living room. She called 999. Then she called me. I was at work when my phone rang. I remember exactly where I was standing. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. The funeral was hard. I don't think I've ever cried that much in public. I gave a eulogy. I talked about how he taught me to change a tire, how he never missed a school event, how he always made sure I knew I could do anything I set my mind to. I meant all of it. I handled most of the arrangements. My brothers were a mess. Mom was too shocked to make decisions. So I sorted the flowers, the service, the wake. People kept telling me how strong I was, how capable. I didn't feel strong. I just felt like someone had to do it. Tom and James leaned on me. They asked me what to say, what to wear, how to get through it. I held them while they cried. I thought that's what older sisters did. At the wake, my uncle, Dad's brother, kept looking at me strangely. He'd start to say something, then stop. He did this 3 or 4 times. I asked him if he was all right. He just nodded and walked away. I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought he was grieving. After the funeral, life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. Mom stayed with me for a week. My brothers checked in occasionally. We knew the will reading was coming, but no one was in a rush. Dad's estate was straightforward, or so we thought. House, savings, some investments. We assumed it would be split evenly, or that Mom would inherit most of it. That's how these things usually go. The solicitor called me 3 weeks ago. He wanted to schedule a meeting. He said all beneficiaries needed to be present. I thought that was standard procedure. The day Dad died, I was in a meeting about a product launch. My phone was on silent. When I came out and saw 6 missed calls from Mom, I knew something was wrong. Mom never calls that many times. Her voice was shaking when I called back. She could barely get the words out. "It's your father, Charlotte. They're doing everything they can." I left my bag at the office. I just ran. The drive to the hospital was a blur. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I remember thinking, please, just let me get there in time. I kept picturing him waking up, annoyed at all the fuss, telling everyone he was fine. But when I got there, a nurse took me to a quiet room. Not to his bedside, to a quiet room. That's when I knew. Mom was sitting there, staring at nothing. Tom and James hadn't arrived yet. The doctor explained what happened. Massive cardiac arrest. He was gone before the ambulance even got there. There was nothing anyone could have done. I sat next to Mom and held her hand. She didn't cry. She just kept saying, "He had toast this morning. He was fine. He had toast." The weeks after were strange. Grief doesn't hit you all at once. It comes in waves when you're not expecting it. I'd be fine, and then I'd see his favorite mug in the kitchen, and I'd have to leave the room. Tom and James fell apart in different ways. Tom went silent. He'd sit in Dad's chair and just stare at the television, not even watching it. James couldn't stop talking. He'd tell the same stories about Dad over and over, like if he kept talking, it would keep Dad alive somehow. I became the organizer. Someone had to. Mom was in no state to make decisions. She couldn't even choose what to wear most days, so I took over. I called the funeral home, I met with the director and went through the options: casket, flowers, service details. I wrote the obituary, I contacted the church, I made a list of people who needed to be informed, and I worked through it methodically, one call at a time. People kept saying, "You're so strong, Charlotte. I don't know how you're doing this." But I wasn't strong. I was just doing what needed to be done. If I stopped moving, I'd have to feel it, and I couldn't afford to feel it yet. The funeral was massive. Dad knew a lot of people: colleagues from his 40 years in manufacturing, neighbors, old friends from university. The church was packed. I gave the eulogy because no one else could. Tom tried to write something but couldn't get through it. James was too young, too raw, so it fell to me. I stood up there and talked about the man I thought I knew. I talked about how he taught me to ride a bike, how he'd quiz me on my times tables at breakfast, how he came to every single one of my school plays, even though I was terrible at acting. I talked about his work ethic, his quiet reliability, his terrible jokes. I meant every word. I looked out at the congregation and saw people nodding, dabbing their eyes. My voice only cracked once near the end when I said, "He made me believe I could do anything." After the service, during the wake at the house, I moved through the rooms making sure everyone had food and drink. I thanked people for coming. I accepted their condolences with grace. I was performing the role of the capable daughter, and I performed it well. That's when I noticed my uncle acting strangely. Uncle Robert is Dad's younger brother. They were close growing up, less so in recent years, but they still spoke regularly. He'd come to the funeral alone. His wife was ill and couldn't travel. He approached me 3 separate times that afternoon. Each time, he'd open his mouth like he was about to tell me something important, then he'd close it again and ask me something mundane instead. "How's your mom holding up? Do you need help with anything? This is a lovely spread." The third time, I stopped him. "Uncle Robert, is there something you want to tell me?" He looked uncomfortable. He glanced around the room like he was checking who might be listening. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Charlotte, just know that your father loved you. Whatever happens, remember that." I didn't understand what he meant. Of course he loved me, I know that. He nodded, but he looked sad. "Good, that's good. I just wanted to make sure you knew." Then he walked away and I didn't see him again before he left. I thought it was just grief talking. People say odd things at funerals. I didn't give it much thought. I should have, because 3 months later, when I was sitting in that solicitor's office, Uncle Robert's words came flooding back. Yesterday changed everything. The solicitor's office was in the city centre, one of those old converted buildings with high ceilings and wooden floors that creak when you walk. I arrived 10 minutes early. I always do. The receptionist offered me tea. I said yes, but I didn't drink it. I just held the cup because I needed something to do with my hands. I sat in the waiting area and looked at the framed certificates on the wall, all very official, all very proper. Tom arrived next, wearing a suit I'd never seen before. He looked uncomfortable in it. James came last, still in his university hoodie under a blazer. He'd clearly thrown it on at the last minute. We didn't talk much while we waited, just small comments about traffic, about the weather, the kind of things you say when you're nervous but don't know why. Mr. Winters was the solicitor handling Dad's estate. I'd spoken to him on the phone a few times, but never met him in person. He was older, maybe mid-60s, with grey hair and glasses that sat low on his nose. He shook each of our hands and gestured for us to sit. His office was cold, not just temperature-wise, though it was that too. It was sterile, organized, everything in its place. There was a window behind his desk that looked out onto a brick wall. He had papers spread out in front of him, Dad's will, documents clipped together in sections. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "First, let me express my condolences," he said. "Your father was a client of this firm for many years. This is always a difficult process." We nodded. Standard opening. I'd expected that. "Now I'll walk you through the details of the estate. Your father was very thorough in his planning. Everything is clearly outlined." I assumed we'd split things fairly. That's what families do. Maybe Mum would get the house and the 3 of us would split the savings. Maybe it would be divided into quarters. I hadn't really thought about the specifics because it didn't seem important. Dad was gone. The money didn't matter. At least, that's what I told myself. Mr. Winters opened the folder and began running through the assets. The house was worth approximately £480,000. It was mortgage-free. Dad had paid it off years ago. There were savings accounts totaling £340,000. He'd been careful with money his whole life, never flashy, but always stable. Then there were the investments, stocks, bonds, a few rental properties he'd acquired over the years. Mr. Winters read through the list methodically. By the time he finished, I was doing rough math in my head. In total, Mr. Winters said, the estate is valued at approximately £3 million. I blinked. 3 million? I knew Dad was comfortable, but I didn't realize he'd accumulated that much. He lived modestly, drove the same car for 15 years, never took expensive holidays. My heart started racing, but not because of the amount. It was racing because I suddenly realized this meeting was going to be more complicated than I thought. Money does strange things to people. I'd seen it tear families apart. I glanced at Tom and James. Tom looked stunned. James was leaning forward, eyes wide. I took a breath and waited for Mr. Winters to explain how it would be divided. That's when everything fell apart. Mr. Winters cleared his throat again. He wasn't looking at any of us directly. He was staring down at the papers. Your father's wishes are outlined clearly in the will. I'll read the relevant section now. He paused, adjusted his glasses again. I remember thinking he seemed uncomfortable, but I didn't understand why. Then he started reading. To my sons, Thomas and James, I leave my entire estate to be divided equally between them. The words didn't land immediately. I heard them, but my brain couldn't process them. Entire estate, divided equally, between them? I waited for him to continue. Surely there was more. Surely there was a section that mentioned me or Mum or some kind of explanation. But Mr. Winters just sat there, looking at the paper. Wait, I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. What about Mum? What about me? Mr. Winters looked up then. He met my eyes for the first time since he'd started reading, and I saw something there. Pity, maybe, or discomfort. Your mother was provided for separately, he said. She receives a lifetime right to remain in the family home, along with a monthly allowance from the estate to cover living expenses. That's outlined in a separate clause. Okay, I said slowly. And me? He hesitated, actually hesitated. A solicitor who'd probably done hundreds of these meetings, and he was hesitating. There is a clause, he said carefully, that addresses your situation. My situation? He looked back down at the paper. I'll read it exactly as written. He took a breath. Charlotte will not require financial support from this estate, as her future husband will provide for her needs and security. It is my belief that a woman's financial stability should come through marriage, and I trust that Charlotte will be well cared for in due course. The room went completely silent. I stared at Mr. Winters. He was still looking at the paper, like he couldn't bear to look at me. I heard the words. I understood them individually, but together they didn't make sense. Future husband, financial stability through marriage, well cared for? I felt something cold spread through my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was just shock, pure disorienting shock. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Could you read that again? Mr. Winters did, word for word, and this time it sank in. My father who'd paid for my education, who told me I could be anything I wanted, who'd watched me build a career, had written into his will that I didn't deserve anything because someday, some man I hadn't even met yet would take care of me. I looked at Tom. He was staring at the floor. I looked at James. He was staring at his hands. Neither of them said anything. I'm not married, I said. My voice was shaking now. I'm not even seeing anyone. Mr. Winters nodded slowly. I understand. Your father's views were traditional. Traditional? The word came out sharper than I intended. This was written when? When did he update the will? Mr. Winters checked the document. 18 months ago, June of 2023. 18 months ago. A year and a half. Not decades ago, when he might have had different ideas about the world. 18 months. I tried to breathe normally, but my chest felt tight. My hands were shaking. I put them in my lap so no one would see. Did he discuss this with you? I asked. Did he explain why? Your father was very clear about his intentions, Mr. Winters said carefully. He believed he was acting in everyone's best interests. Everyone's best interests. Everyone except mine. I looked at Tom again. Did you know about this? He finally looked up. His face was pale. Charlotte, did you know? He mentioned something, Tom said quietly, a few months ago. He said he was making sure James and I were taken care of. He said you'd be fine because you'd get married eventually. And you didn't think to tell me? Tom didn't answer. I turned to James. What about you? James shook his head quickly. I didn't know the details, I swear. I thought we'd all get something. The room felt too small. The air felt too thick. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. £3 million split between my two younger brothers, and I got nothing because my father genuinely believed that my value, my security, my entire future should rest on a man I might never meet. And here's where it gets worse. Because what happened next wasn't Mr. Winters explaining some loophole or Tom and James immediately saying they'd split it with me anyway. What happened next was silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. My brothers just sat there, and I realized they were going to take it. All of it. Without a word. The silence stretched on. I kept waiting for one of them to say something. Anything. Tom was staring at the edge of Mr. Winters' desk. His jaw was tight. James had pulled out his phone and was looking at the screen, though I could tell he wasn't actually reading anything, just avoiding eye contact. "Tom," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Say something." He looked up. His eyes were red, but I couldn't tell if it was from emotion or just exhaustion. "Charlotte, we didn't know it would be like this. But you knew something. He said he was taking care of us. He didn't say—" Tom stopped, swallowed. "I didn't know you were getting nothing." "But now you do know," I said. "So what are you going to do about it?" He didn't answer. He just looked away again. I turned to James. "And you?" James kept his eyes on his phone. His thumb was moving across the screen, scrolling through nothing. "It's what Dad wanted," he said quietly. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" He finally looked at me. He looked young, younger than 21. "I don't know what you want me to say, Charlotte. I want you to say this is wrong. I want you to say you're going to do something about it." He didn't say anything. Mr. Winters shifted in his seat. He cleared his throat softly, trying to regain control of the room. "If there are no further questions about the terms of the will, we can proceed with the paperwork." "I have questions," I interrupted. He looked at me, waited. "Did my father give you a reason for this? Did he explain why he thought this was fair?" Mr. Winters hesitated. He glanced at Tom and James, then back at me. "Your father was very firm in his beliefs. He felt that he was providing for his sons in the way that made the most sense. He believed you would be provided for through marriage. I'm 27. I'm single. I've been supporting myself for 5 years. I understand. Do you? Because I don't." Mr. Winters folded his hands on the desk. He looked uncomfortable, but he maintained his professional tone. "Miss Charlotte, I'm simply executing your father's wishes as outlined in a legal document. I don't make judgments about the content. I ensure it's carried out correctly. Even when it's blatantly sexist? The law allows individuals to distribute their estates as they see fit, provided they're of sound mind at the time of writing. Your father was assessed and deemed competent." "Of course he was competent. That's not the issue. The issue is that he valued his sons more than his daughter." Mr. Winters didn't respond to that. He just looked at me with that same expression of professional sympathy that meant nothing. I could feel my composure starting to crack. My throat was tight. My eyes were stinging. I was not going to cry in front of anyone. I was not going to give anyone in that room the satisfaction of seeing me break down. "Excuse me," I said, pushing my chair back. "I need a moment." I left the office before anyone could respond. I walked down the hallway, past the receptionist who looked up with concern, and found the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and pressed my back against the door. Then I let myself fall apart. It wasn't loud. I didn't sob. I just stood there with my hand over my mouth, shaking, while tears ran down my face. I couldn't breathe properly. Every time I tried to inhale, it came out jagged and broken. 3 million pounds. My brothers were millionaires now, and I was standing in a solicitor's bathroom trying not to scream. I thought about my father, about every time he told me he was proud of me, every time he'd said I could do anything I set my mind to. Had he meant any of it? The silence stretched on. I kept waiting for one of them to say something. Anything. Tom was staring at the edge of Mr. Winters' desk. His jaw was tight. James had pulled out his phone and was looking at the screen, though I could tell he wasn't actually reading anything, just avoiding eye contact. "Tom," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "Say something." He looked up. His eyes were red, but I couldn't tell if it was from emotion or just exhaustion. "Charlotte, we didn't know it would be like this. But you knew something. He said he was taking care of us. He didn't say—" Tom stopped, swallowed. "I didn't know you were getting nothing. But now you do know," I said. "So what are you going to do about it?" He didn't answer. He just looked away again. I turned to James. "And you?" James kept his eyes on his phone. His thumb was moving across the screen, scrolling through nothing. "It's what Dad wanted," he said quietly. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" He finally looked at me. He looked young, younger than 21. "I don't know what you want me to say, Charlotte. I want you to say this is wrong. I want you to say you're going to do something about it." He didn't say anything. Mr. Winters shifted in his seat. He cleared his throat softly, trying to regain control of the room. "If there are no further questions about the terms of the will, we can proceed with the paperwork." I have questions, I interrupted. He looked at me, waited. Did my father give you a reason for this? Did he explain why he thought this was fair? Mr. Winters hesitated. He glanced at Tom and James, then back at me. Your father was very firm in his beliefs. He felt that he was providing for his sons in the way that made the most sense. He believed you would be provided for through marriage. I'm 27. I'm single. I've been supporting myself for 5 years. I understand. Do you? Because I don't. Mr. Winters folded his hands on the desk. He looked uncomfortable, but he maintained his professional tone. Miss Charlotte, I'm simply executing your father's wishes as outlined in a legal document. I don't make judgments about the content. I ensure it's carried out correctly. Even when it's blatantly sexist, the law allows individuals to distribute their estates as they see fit, provided they're of sound mind at the time of writing. Your father was assessed and deemed competent. Of course he was competent, I said. That's not the issue. The issue is that he valued his sons more than his daughter. Mr. Winters didn't respond to that. He just looked at me with that same expression of professional sympathy that meant nothing. I could feel my composure starting to crack. My throat was tight. My eyes were stinging. I was not going to cry in front of them. I was not going to give anyone in that room the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Excuse me, I said, pushing my chair back. I need a moment. I left the office before anyone could respond. I walked down the hallway, past the receptionist who looked up with concern, and found the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and pressed my back against the door. Then I let myself fall apart. It wasn't loud. I didn't sob. I just stood there with my hand over my mouth, shaking, while tears ran down my face. I couldn't breathe properly. Every time I tried to inhale, it came out jagged and broken. 3 million pounds. My brothers were millionaires now, and I was standing in a solicitor's bathroom trying not to scream. I thought about my father, about every time he told me I was proud of me, every time he said I could do anything I set my mind to. Had he meant any of it? Or had there always been this caveat, this assumption that none of it really mattered because eventually I'd just be someone's wife? I stayed in there for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, long enough to stop shaking, long enough to wipe my face and fix my makeup as best I could. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. When I came back into the office, the 3 of them were talking quietly. They stopped when I walked in. I sat down. I looked directly at Mr. Winters. I need to know more about how this will was created. He nodded slowly. What specifically would you like to know? When was it written? The exact date? He checked the document. The will was originally drafted in 2015. It was updated twice, once in 2019 and most recently in June 2023. And the clause about me? When was that added? The most recent update, June 2023. So it wasn't some relic from years ago. It was recent, deliberate, thought out. Did he discuss it with anyone? A financial advisor? Family members? Mr. Winters looked uncomfortable again. Your father was very firm in his beliefs. He felt that he was providing for his sons in the way that made the most sense. He believed you would be provided for through marriage. I'm 27. I'm single. I've been supporting myself for 5 years. I understand. Do you? Because I don't. Mr. Winters folded his hands on the desk. He looked uncomfortable, but he maintained his professional tone. Miss Charlotte, I'm simply executing your father's wishes as outlined in a legal document. I don't make judgments about the content. I ensure it's carried out correctly. Even when it's blatantly sexist, the law allows individuals to distribute their estates as they see fit, provided they're of sound mind at the time of writing. Your father was assessed and deemed competent. Of course he was competent, I said. That's not the issue. The issue is that he valued his sons more than his daughter. Mr. Winters didn't respond to that. He just looked at me with that same expression of professional sympathy that meant nothing. I could feel my composure starting to crack. My throat was tight. My eyes were stinging. I was not going to cry in front of them. I was not going to give anyone in that room the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Excuse me, I said, pushing my chair back. I need a moment. I left the office before anyone could respond. I walked down the hallway, past the receptionist who looked up with concern, and found the bathroom. I locked myself in a stall and pressed my back against the door. Then I let myself fall apart. It wasn't loud. I didn't sob. I just stood there with my hand over my mouth, shaking while tears ran down my face. I couldn't breathe properly. Every time I tried to inhale, it came out jagged and broken. 3 million pounds. My brothers were millionaires now, and I was standing in a solicitor's bathroom trying not to scream. I thought about my father, about every time he told me he was proud of me, every time he'd said I could do anything I set my mind to. Had he meant any of it? Or had there always been this caveat, this assumption that none of it really mattered because eventually I'd just be someone's wife? I stayed in there for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, long enough to stop shaking, long enough to wipe my face and fix my makeup as best I could. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. When I came back into the office, the three of them were talking quietly. They stopped when I walked in. I sat down. I looked directly at Mr. Winters. I need to know more about how this will was created. He nodded slowly. What specifically would you like to know? When was it written? The exact date? He checked the document. The will was originally drafted in 2015. It was updated twice, once in 2019 and most recently in June 2023. And the clause about me, when was that added? The most recent update, June 2023. So it wasn't some relic from years ago. It was recent, deliberate, thought out. Did he discuss it with anyone? A financial advisor? Family members? Mr. Winters looked uncomfortable again. Your father consulted with me extensively. He was very clear about his intentions. He mentioned that he discussed it with his brother. Uncle Robert. That's why he'd acted so strangely at the funeral. He'd known. He'd known what was in the will, and he tried to warn me without actually warning me. Did he give a reason beyond the marriage thing? He believed traditional family structures were important. He felt that men should provide for their families and that women were best served by focusing on marriage and children. I stared at him. He said that out loud. Those weren't his exact words, but yes, that was the sentiment. And you didn't think to push back? You didn't think to say, maybe this is outdated? Maybe this is unfair? Mr. Winters met my eyes. Miss Charlotte, it's not my job to change a client's mind. It's my job to execute their wishes within the bounds of the law. Even when those wishes are discriminatory? The law doesn't view this as discrimination. It's a private family matter. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. Mr. Winters was just the messenger. The person I needed to be angry at was dead. The meeting ended shortly after that. Mr. Winters went through the remaining formalities, timelines for probate, paperwork that needed signing, contact information if we had questions. I barely heard any of it. When we finally left the building, I stopped Tom and James on the pavement outside. The afternoon was cold, gray sky, traffic noise all around us. I need to know what Dad told you, I said. Tom shoved his hands in his pockets. Charlotte, can we not do this right now? Yes, right now. What did he say to you about the will? He sighed, looked at James, who was standing a few feet away pretending to check his phone again. He said he wanted to make sure we were taken care of. He said we'd need the money to start our lives, buy houses, start businesses maybe. And what did he say about me? Tom hesitated. Tell me. He said you'd be fine. He said you were smart and capable, and that when you got married, your husband would make sure you were comfortable. When I got married, not if. Yeah. I turned to James. What about you? What did he tell you? James finally put his phone away. He looked defensive. He said the same thing, that we were getting the estate because we're men, because it's our job to build something. He said that's how it's supposed to work. And you agreed with him? I didn't disagree. That's not the same thing. Charlotte, it's what he wanted, James said, his voice rising slightly. He spent his whole life building that money. He gets to decide what to do with it. Even if what he decided is completely sexist? It's not about that. Then what is it about? James went quiet. He kicked at the pavement. I don't know. It's done now. The will is the will. We can't change it. You could give me a share. You could do the right thing. Neither of them responded. I looked at Tom. You're really going to take all of it? You're really going to let this stand? Tom's face was pained. I need to think about it, Charlotte. This is a lot. You can't just what? Be fair to your sister? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. But I could see it in their faces. They weren't going to do anything. They were going to take the money and justify it somehow. Tell themselves Dad knew best. Tell themselves it was legal, so it must be okay. Unbelievable, I said quietly. Tom reached out like he was going to touch my arm, but I stepped back. Don't. Charlotte, please. No, you've made your choice, both of you. I turned and walked toward my car. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see their faces anymore. Behind me, I heard James say something to Tom, but I couldn't make out the words. I didn't care. I got in my car, closed the door, and just sat there for a moment. My hands were gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't crying anymore. I was past crying. I was angry. The drive home was a blur. I don't remember most of it. I was on autopilot. But my mind wouldn't stop. It kept replaying things. Conversations I'd had with my father over the years. Things I'd brushed off at the time. Things I'd convinced myself didn't mean anything. When you get married, you'll understand. Your husband will appreciate that you know how to cook. It's good you're working now, but eventually you'll want to focus on family. I'd heard these comments dozens of times, hundreds maybe, and every time I'd rolled my eyes or changed the subject or told myself he was just old-fashioned. He didn't mean anything by it. It was just how he was raised. But he did mean it. He meant every word. When I got my first promotion at work, I'd called him excited. I'd worked so hard for it. I thought he'd be proud. He said, "That's nice, love, but don't let work consume you. Marriage is what really matters." When I bought my first car with my own money, he said, "Good for you, though your future husband might want to help with things like that." When I told him I was thinking about getting my own flat, he said, "Why not save your money? You'll need it for a wedding someday." Every achievement I'd worked for, he'd redirected toward marriage, toward a man who didn't exist, toward a future he'd decided for me without ever asking what I wanted. And I'd ignored it. I told myself it didn't matter what he thought. I was living my own life. Except it did matter, because when it came down to it, when it really counted, he'd made his beliefs clear. He'd put them in writing. He'd made sure that even after he was gone, I'd know exactly how much he valued me compared to my brothers. Not at all. By the time I got home, I felt numb. I sat in my flat that I paid for, that I'd worked for, that I was proud of, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. I thought about calling someone, a friend maybe, someone who could tell me I wasn't crazy, that this was wrong. But I didn't. I just sat there in the dark. And I thought about what came next, because this wasn't over, not by a long shot. If you've ever been treated differently by your family because of your gender, if you've ever had someone assume your worth was tied to a relationship you hadn't even entered yet, leave a comment, because I need to know I'm not alone in this. But wait, it doesn't end there. What happened over the next few days made everything so much worse. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my childhood, trying to pinpoint when it started, when my father decided I was worth less than my brothers. I grew up in what most people would call a traditional household. Mom stayed home, she raised us, kept the house, had dinner ready when Dad came home from work. She never complained about it, at least not that I heard. Dad worked in manufacturing management, long hours. He was good at his job, respected. He provided well for us. We never wanted for anything material. But the roles were clear. Dad made the money, Mom made the home. That's how it was. I didn't question it when I was young. It was just normal. That's what families looked like, I thought. But somewhere around secondary school, I started noticing things. When I brought home top marks in maths, Dad would nod and say, "Well done." Then he'd turn to Tom, who'd gotten a B, and spend 20 minutes talking about how important it was for men to be good with numbers, how it would help him in business someday. When I won a science award, Dad said, "That's lovely, Charlotte." When Tom made the football team, Dad took him out to dinner to celebrate. I told myself it was because Tom needed more encouragement. He wasn't as naturally academic as I was. Dad was just trying to build his confidence. But then James came along, and it was the same thing. James was decent at school, but never passionate about it. He preferred sports, video games, being with friends, and Dad was fine with that. "Boys will be boys," he'd say. "James will find his way." When I said I wanted to study marketing at university, Dad asked, "Are you sure? That's a lot of debt for something you might not finish." "Why wouldn't I finish?" "Well, life happens. You might meet someone." I went anyway, got a first-class degree, came home expecting praise. Dad said, "Good, now you can get a nice job for a few years before you settle down." Tom and James were encouraged in everything. Business ideas, sports, hobbies. Dad would sit with them for hours talking about their futures, what they wanted to build, what kind of men they wanted to become. He never once asked me what kind of woman I wanted to become. It was assumed I already knew. Wife, mother. That was the template. I remember one Christmas. I must have been 16. The whole family was gathered. Aunts, uncles, cousins. I'd just gotten my GCSE results. Straight A's. I was proud. My aunt asked about them and I told her. She said, "Well done, Charlotte. You'll make some man very happy one day with a brain like that." Everyone laughed, like it was a compliment. I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something, to tell her that my intelligence was mine, not something that existed to benefit a future husband. He just smiled and said, "She's a smart girl, our Charlotte." That was it. I thought he was proud of me. I really did. I thought he just wasn't good at expressing it. Some fathers aren't. They show love through actions, not words. But looking back now, I see it clearly, the cognitive dissonance I'd been living with for years. He did love me, I believe that, but he was also disappointed in me for not wanting what he thought I should want. Every time I chose my career over dating, I was going against his plan for me. Every time I prioritized independence over finding a husband, I was rejecting the role he'd assigned me. And the worst part? I'd spent years trying to prove myself to him, trying to show him that I could be successful, that I could make him proud on my own terms. But it didn't matter, because in his mind, none of it mattered. Not my degree, not my job, not my independence. All that mattered was whether I'd eventually fulfill my purpose, which to him was becoming someone's wife. I wasn't a person with my own goals. I was a daughter waiting to be handed off to a husband, and I'd never be anything more than that to him. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. I'd maybe slept 2 hours. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, and I did something I'd been avoiding. I looked at my finances, really looked at them. I have a decent job. I make £42,000 a year. It's good money, better than a lot of people my age. I'm not struggling in any dramatic way, but I'm also not comfortable. My student loan balance is still sitting at £31,000. I pay $180 a month toward it, and it barely makes a dent because of the interest. At this rate, I'll be paying it off until I'm in my 40s. My rent is $1,400 a month. I live in Manchester because that's where my job is, and rent here isn't cheap. It's a nice flat, 1 bedroom, nothing fancy, but it's mine. After rent, loan payments, utilities, council tax, groceries, transport, I'm left with maybe $400 a month. That goes into savings, but it builds slowly. I've got about £8,000 in my emergency fund right now. I'm proud of that. I built it myself. But it's not enough to buy a house. It's not even enough for a proper deposit in this market. I looked at my brother's situations. Tom has been living at home until 2 months ago. He works in sales, makes maybe £28,000 a year. He only moved out because Dad died, and the house felt too sad. He's renting a room in a shared house for $600 a month. James is still at university. He works part-time at a bar on weekends, makes maybe $400 a month. His tuition is covered by student loans, and he lives in university accommodation. Mom sends him money for food. Neither of them has ever had to be truly independent, not the way I have. And now, they're millionaires. Tom's getting $1.5 million. James is getting $1.5 million. They can buy houses outright, multiple houses. They can invest, they can quit their jobs if they want. They can do whatever they like for the rest of their lives and never worry about money again. I'm still sitting here with my student debt and my modest savings, trying to figure out how I'll ever afford a house in this economy. The irony is almost funny. Almost. I'm the most financially responsible one. I've been supporting myself completely for 5 years. I budget, I save, I don't make stupid purchases. I think long term. Tom's never had a savings account. He spends money the day he gets it. New trainers, nights out, gadgets he doesn't need. James doesn't even think about money. Why would he? He's never had to. And yet, they're the ones who get rewarded. They're the ones Dad decided needed securing. I wanted to laugh or scream. I wasn't sure which. What does $1.5 million mean for them? It means freedom, security, options, the ability to shape their lives however they want. What does $0 mean for me? It means I keep going exactly as I have been, working, saving, hoping that someday I'll be able to afford the life I want. Unless, of course, I get married. Then apparently all my problems are solved. The part that really broke me was this. I don't even want the money for luxury. I'm not dreaming of sports cars or designer clothes or expensive holidays. I want to buy a small house, somewhere I can actually settle, somewhere I'm not throwing away $1,400 a month on rent that builds nothing. I want to pay off my student loans so I can breathe a little easier each month. I want to have enough saved that if something goes wrong, if I lose my job, if I get sick, if life happens, I'm not one disaster away from losing everything I've built. That's it. That's what the money would mean to me. But according to my father, I don't deserve that security. Not from him, not from my own family. I deserved to wait, to hope, to rely on a man who may or may not ever exist. And if he doesn't, well, that wasn't my father's problem, was it? I started thinking about the marriage clause in detail, really picking it apart. Her future husband will provide for her needs and security. Future husband, not current, future. Which means my father wrote this will fully aware that I wasn't married, that I wasn't even dating anyone seriously. He was banking on a hypothetical person, someone who didn't exist, someone who might never exist. And what if I never get married? What if I choose not to? What if I'm perfectly happy being single? What if I'm gay? That thought hit me hard even though I'm not. But what if I was? My father's entire justification falls apart. There would be no husband. There would be no man to provide for me. Would he have changed the will then, or would he have just been disappointed in me for that too? And even if I do get married someday, which is a big if, why does that mean I don't deserve anything now? Marriage isn't a guarantee of financial security. It's not the 1950s. Women work, women earn, marriages end, people die. Relying entirely on someone else for your financial stability is exactly the kind of thing that leaves women vulnerable. My father knew this. He must have. He saw what happened when women of his generation got divorced with no careers, no savings, no independence. But he didn't care, because in his mind, that's just how it should be. Women belong in the home, men provide. That's the natural order. Never mind that I'd spent my entire adult life proving I didn't need someone to provide for me. Never mind that I was doing just fine on my own. It didn't matter, because I'd committed the cardinal sin of being born female. I thought about my future. Really thought about it. If I meet someone tomorrow and we get married in a few years, does that make my father right? Does that mean I didn't need the money because, look, a husband appeared? Or does it mean I got lucky, that I happened to meet someone who fit into the role my father decided I needed to fill? And what about my career? The decade I've spent building it. Does that all become irrelevant the moment I get a ring on my finger? I've worked so hard to be independent, to not need anyone, to prove that I'm capable on my own. And my father looked at all of that and said, none of this matters. You're a woman. Your value is in being a wife. I looked up inheritance statistics that night. I needed to know if this was common, if other women were dealing with this. Turns out it's more common than you'd think. Sons inherit more than daughters in a significant number of families. Sometimes it's explicit, like in my case. Sometimes it's more subtle. The son gets the business, the property, the investments. The daughter gets jewelry, personal items, smaller sums. The justification is usually the same. Sons need to provide for their families. Daughters will be provided for by their husbands. It's inheritance inequality based purely on gender. And it's legal, completely legal. Because it's private family money, the law doesn't see it as discrimination. It's just a father's choice. But it is discrimination. It's saying that one child deserves security and the other doesn't, based solely on what's between their legs. I kept coming back to the same thought. This isn't just about the money. If my father had left me 100,000 pounds and my brothers 1.45 million pounds each, I could maybe understand it. Maybe he thought they needed more help getting started. Maybe he thought I was doing fine on my own. But zero? Nothing at all? That's not about financial need. That's about value. That's about my father deciding that his daughter, who worked hard, who built a career, who never asked him for anything, was worth less than his sons simply because she was born female. And the message was clear. You don't matter. Not really. Not unless a man decides you do. I thought about all the women in my family. My mom, who gave up her career to raise us. My aunts, who were always secondary to their husbands. My cousins, who were taught to be pretty and agreeable and not too ambitious. This wasn't just about me. This was generational. This was a pattern I'd been too close to see. And I was done with it. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I wasn't going to just accept this. I wasn't going to disappear quietly into the background and wait for some imaginary husband to validate my existence. My father made his choice. Now I was going to make mine. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, at my pathetic bank balance, and I started really unpacking what my father had written. That clause, her future husband will provide for her needs and security. Future husband. I'm 27. I've had 3 serious relationships in my life. The first was at university, ended when we graduated and wanted different things. The second lasted 8 months, ended when I realized we had nothing in common outside of physical attraction. The third was 2 years ago, ended when he got a job in London and expected me to drop everything and follow him without even discussing it. Since then, a few dates here and there, nothing that went anywhere, nothing that even came close to marriage. I'm not actively looking either. I'm focused on my career, on building something for myself. I go out with friends, I have hobbies, I'm content. The idea of marriage isn't something I think about daily. It's not a goal I'm working toward. Maybe it'll happen someday, maybe it won't. And that's fine. That should be fine. But what if it doesn't happen? What if I'm 50 and still single? What if I choose not to marry? What if I decide I'm happier alone, or that I don't want the legal entanglement, or that I'd rather focus on my career and my friends and my own life? What if I'm gay? I'm not, but what if I were? What if I'd spent years hiding it from my family because I knew they wouldn't accept it? There'd be no husband then. The entire foundation of my father's logic would crumble. Would he have written a different clause? Charlotte's future wife will provide for her? Of course not. He probably never even considered the possibility. And what if I just prioritize my career over relationships? What if I decide that building something professionally is more important to me than finding a partner? In my father's worldview, none of these options exist. There's only one acceptable path for a woman: marriage. Everything else is just killing time until that happens. The foundation of this whole thing is sexist. There's no other word for it. A woman's worth equals a man's responsibility to provide for her. That's what my father believed. That's what he put in writing. It doesn't matter what I accomplish. It doesn't matter how capable I am, how hard I work, how independent I've become. All of that is irrelevant because fundamentally, I'm not supposed to provide for myself. That's a man's job. And until a man appears to do that job, I'm just, what? Incomplete? In limbo? Not deserving of security. We're living in 2025. Women have been in the workforce for generations. We've been breadwinners, CEOs, entrepreneurs. We've bought our own houses, raised our own children, built our own empires. But my father was operating on a 1950s mindset, maybe earlier. A mindset where women were dependents, not individuals, where our value was tied entirely to our relationships with men, first our fathers, then our husbands. My economic independence meant nothing to him. The fact that I'd been supporting myself for years, that I'd built a career, that I was doing just fine without a man, none of it registered. Because in his mind, it shouldn't be that way. I shouldn't have to work. I should be at home waiting for a husband to take care of me. The fact that I chose differently was just a temporary deviation. Eventually, I'd fall into line. Eventually, I'd do what women are supposed to do. And here's what really got me. There was no equivalent clause for my brothers. Tom and James are both single. Tom's had a few girlfriends, nothing serious. James has barely dated at all. He's too focused on university and going out with his mates. But there was no line in the will that said Thomas will not require financial support as his future wife will provide for him. Of course not, because that would be absurd. Men aren't expected to rely on their partners for financial security. Men are expected to build that security themselves. And if they get married, great. If they don't, also great. Their value isn't tied to their relationship status. But women, we're different, apparently. We're not fully formed people until we're attached to a man. We're not deserving of security until someone else decides we are. The double standard is so blatant, it's almost offensive that anyone could pretend it's not there. My brothers get millions because they're men, and men need resources to build their lives. I get nothing because I'm a woman, and women get resources from husbands. Same family, same father, same upbringing, different chromosomes, completely different outcomes. I started researching inheritance inequality that night. I needed to know if this was just my family, or if it was bigger than that. It's bigger. Studies show that in families with traditional values, sons inherit significantly more than daughters. Sometimes it's explicit, written into wills the way my father did. Sometimes it's more subtle. The family business goes to the son. The property goes to the son. The investments go to the son. The daughter gets sentimental items, jewelry, maybe a smaller cash sum. The justification is almost always the same. Sons need to provide for their families. Daughters will be provided for by their husbands. In some cultures, it's even enshrined in law. Women inherit half of what men do if they inherit anything at all. In the UK, it's not law, but it's still practice. It still happens. And it's completely legal because inheritance is considered private family business. You can write your will however you want. You can leave everything to one child and nothing to the others. You can explicitly state that you're cutting someone out because of their gender, their sexuality, their life choices. As long as you're deemed mentally competent when you write it, it stands. The law doesn't see it as discrimination. It sees it as personal choice. But here's the thing. This isn't just about money anymore. It's about what that money represents. It's about the message my father sent, not just to me, but to anyone who reads that will. He sent a message that his daughter's independence doesn't matter, that her career doesn't matter, that her hard work, her accomplishments, her entire adult life doesn't matter. What matters is whether she fulfills the role he's assigned her, and until she does, she's not worthy of his support. That's the message, and it's not just coming from my father. It's coming from a society that still, in so many ways, treats women as secondary, as incomplete without men, as less deserving of resources, of security, of autonomy. I thought we were past this. I really did. But sitting there in my flat, looking at that will, I realized we're not even close. If you're tired of being valued based on your marital status, if you're exhausted by the expectation that your worth is tied to whether a man chooses you, leave a comment, because I can't be the only one who feels like we're still fighting battles that should have been won decades ago. This isn't just my story. It's the story of every woman who's been told she's not enough on her own, that she needs someone else to complete her, that her value is dependent on someone else's decision to love her. And I'm done accepting it. 3 days after the will reading, I started reaching out to extended family. I needed to know if anyone else knew about this, if anyone had tried to talk my father out of it. I called Uncle Robert first. He was Dad's younger brother, the one who'd acted so strangely at the funeral. He picked up on the third ring. "Charlotte," he said. His voice was heavy. He already knew why I was calling. "You knew," I said, "at the funeral. That's why you were acting weird." There was a long pause. "Your father told me about the will last year. He wanted my opinion." "And what did you say?" "I told him it wasn't fair. I told him times had changed, that you deserved the same as your brothers. And he said I didn't understand. He said he had traditional values and he wasn't going to apologize for them. He said it was his money and his decision. I sat down. My legs felt weak. You couldn't have told me? Given me some warning? He made me promise not to, said it would only cause problems before he was gone. I don't know what I thought. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I called my Aunt Linda next. She's my mother's sister, lives in Birmingham. She's always been the diplomatic one in the family, the peacemaker. Oh, sweetheart, she said when I told her. I heard about the will. I'm so sorry. Did you know? Not the specifics, no, but your father mentioned once that he was making provisions for the boys. I assumed you were included. Well, I wasn't. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, maybe he thought he was protecting you. You know how men of that generation think. They believe they're doing what's best. Protecting me from what? Financial security? I know it doesn't make sense to us, Charlotte, but to him it probably did. He probably thought a husband would take better care of you than money could. That's not protection, Aunt Linda. That's control. She sighed. I know, you're right. I'm just trying to understand his reasoning. There is no reasoning, it's just sexism. She didn't argue with that. My cousin Emma was different. She's 32, works in finance in London, sharp as anything. When I told her, she didn't hesitate. That's absolutely insane, Charlotte. That's actual discrimination. I know. No, I mean legally. You might have grounds to contest this. It's gender-based discrimination in an inheritance. There are provisions. I've looked into it. It's not straightforward. But it's possible. Maybe. I don't know yet. Well, whatever you decide to do, I'm behind you. This is completely wrong. Your dad was wrong, and your brothers are wrong for going along with it. It was the first time someone had said it so clearly, without trying to soften it or explain it away. I almost cried. Thank you, I said. I mean it, Charlotte. Don't let them make you feel like you're overreacting. You're not. This is outrageous. The family split pretty clearly down generational lines. The older generation, my father's siblings, my mother's siblings, their friends, mostly defended the will. Not enthusiastically, but they defended it. It was his money. He had the right to distribute it how he wanted. He came from a different time. The younger generation, my cousins, my friends, people my age, were universally appalled. That's discrimination. Your brothers should share it. You need to fight this. Some people didn't want to get involved at all. They changed the subject when I brought it up or gave non-committal responses. They didn't want to take sides. But the silence from my mother's side hurt the most. Mom died 6 years ago. Cancer. She never got to see me graduate, never saw me build my career, never saw me become independent. I asked Tom and James to meet me at a cafe. I needed one more conversation. Tom arrived looking exhausted. James came late, earbuds in, treating this like an inconvenience. I'm asking you to do the right thing, I said. Split it 3 ways, 1 million each. That's fair. Tom stared at his coffee. It's not what Dad wanted. Dad was wrong. James leaned back. He was sound of mind. The will is legal. We can't go against it just because you don't like it. I don't like it because it's sexist. It's his money, James said. He gets to decide. Tom suggested giving me something, not a full third, just enough to help with loans, like charity, like I should be grateful for scraps. I looked at both of them. You're choosing money over your sister. Tom flinched but said nothing. James stayed silent. I stood up. Now I know where I stand. The weeks after were the worst of my life. I couldn't mourn my father properly. Every good memory turned bitter the moment I remembered the will. I started therapy. Work was suffering. I felt completely isolated. But my friends became my family. They checked on me daily. They didn't minimize it. They just listened. And I realized, blood doesn't make family. Choice does. 4 weeks later, I met with Rebecca, an inheritance disputes solicitor. Can I contest it? I asked. Possibly. Under the Inheritance Act 1975, you can claim you didn't receive reasonable provision. The discrimination angle is your strongest argument. What are my chances? 40 to 60%, but legal fees could be 50 to 100,000 pounds. The case would take 1 to 2 years. I left with 4 options weighing on me. Fight, expensive, public, would destroy what's left of my family, but it would be standing up for principle. Accept it and move on. Peace, but living with injustice. Make a public statement, advocacy without legal action, but exposing everything. Cut contact entirely. Freedom, but also loneliness. What does justice even look like here? Is the fight worth it? Part of me wanted to fight on principle, but another part was just exhausted. I kept thinking, I have to choose between my dignity and my family. There's no option where I get both. That's what haunts me most. I've decided to consult with a barrister about my options. I'm documenting everything. Because this isn't about the money anymore. This is about principle, about saying that in 2025, it's not acceptable to value daughters less than sons. To fathers, your daughters deserve equal treatment. To siblings, fairness should matter more than inheritance. To women, your worth isn't tied to anyone else. You are enough on your own. I'm building my life on my own terms now. I'm done waiting for a man to validate my existence. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe. There will be updates. Now I need your honest opinion. Would you take your family to court over this or walk away? And if you were one of my brothers, would you voluntarily split it 3 ways? Leave your answers in the comments. Your perspective might actually help me decide. This is Charlotte, signing off, but I'll be back with an update soon. Because this story, it's not over yet.